I've been trying to get my man on here now for several weeks. Episode 12, Bmoney Beastin podcast. I'm here with my dog, Matt Pitts. Matthew Pitts is one of the coolest guys in the world. We've had our spats over the years. I love you so much, man. You know, no hard feelings on anything. He's thrown me out of the room before. It was one of the greatest things in the world. He's like, dude, shut up, leave me alone, get out. And I look back on those things and I'm like, dude, that's what should have happened in that moment. Head coach of the middle school at McCallie, and he runs Grindhouse Wrestling, which is the original Grindhouse Wrestling. So Missouri, Arizona, y'all are, just piggybacking off of the OG down here in Georgia. I want to hear your story, man, because I think everybody will love it, and you've told me most of it over the years. But like, how kids like wrestle today, it's kind of overdone in a way, right? Like, you see these kids wrestling, 150 matches a year, and they're cutting weight constantly. And, after a while, you see that kind of like dwindle. Like, kids peak when they're like 14 now, right? Like, it's not good for longevity. So you've told me over the years how you did it. Your dad was a coach. Like, let's kind of talk about that, like how you kind of came up.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot different back then in the early 90s. Late 80s, early 90s, youth wrestling wasn't really a thing. So I was blessed. My dad was a coach, so I was around it a good bit, and I would just tag along and piggyback wrestling camps and going to practice. But I usually never had anybody to practice with. I can remember my first camp, like overnight camp, first camp I went to, I was in 5th grade, and my buddy got mono right before it. And so I still had to go, but I was the only youth kid there. It was all high school. I didn't have anybody to wrestle with, but I still went because my dad paid for it. So, but yeah, I mean, I was just lucky that dad coached, so I was around it. Outside of that, I don't think I would have been exposed to it probably until maybe middle or high school, when I think probably a lot of kids do get exposed to it around where we live today even. But yeah, I would say a lot of them start in 6th grade, and it's changed a lot to where, like my generation, the generation before me, has been coming back and giving back to the state and to the region, to where now you've got wrestlers that are coaches instead of PE coaches and football coaches that got an extra stipend to fill in. So, that's changed a lot. We've always had really good wrestlers around here, I would say, but, I'd say the depth in our area has gotten a lot better. But, youth wrestling coming up, I just practiced till 6th grade. I didn't compete at all because we didn't know about it. I mean, they had it, but we didn't know about it. And I did my little region wrestling for the year, and then I would just practice the rest of the year. So I probably was wrestling like 20 matches up until into 7th grade, 8th grade. And then that was about the time I found out about more. I remember going to state, watching Whit Durden wrestle in the state championships, who to me, he's one of the greatest to ever come out of Georgia. And I just remember watching him win state as a freshman, and his name would be in like they would do like a biannual newsletter with Team Georgia, and his name would be in it, and Sean Haig's name would be in it. And I just remember their names standing out and getting to watch Whit. I'm like, man, I really like that kid. I like how he wrestles. And so Dad went to Dublin's coach and then found out Arturo's name from him. And then so he was like, yeah, he drives up to Lawrenceville, or maybe it was Tucker. He was off Tucker at that time. And he was like, he drives up a couple times a week from Dublin to Lawrenceville. That's a haul. So I was like, man, I should probably start doing something like that. And then the next weekend we went to like Make Team Georgia to wrestle. There was a thing called, I don't know if you remember, there was a thing called Future Champions.
Garrison Goins told me about that years ago. I asked him I think it was on the bus when we were kids, and he was telling me about like that was the youth wrestling thing at that time. And Greg was telling me that too. Greg Hopkins, yeah.
They were kind of on the back end of the new one, but there was one before them that actually Rob Kane. I think his dad started it. He's I want to say a 2 or 3 timer from Ringgold back in the late 90s, but it was based out of there. It was kind of like the North Georgia League that they've started up now.
Okay.
But I remember qualifying for that for Team Georgia, and they did a tournament at UTC when I think I was in 8th grade. And at that tournament, there's a guy walking around handing out flyers, and this was for Arturo's. So I was like, oh, I just heard Arturo's name, and now actually it was Chris Rodriguez was coming around giving out flyers at this qualifier tournament to make Team Georgia. I was like, man, that might be a sign. And then I made the team. I remember I beat a kid. His name was Jacob Pascal. Some of the old Georgia wrestler heads might remember. I think he was a state champ at McEachern eventually, but he was really tough. And I think he'd won youth state that year. And I kind of came out of nowhere and beat him. It was a really tough match, but I just remember all the dads coming over and being like, who are you? Where did you come from? It's like, I didn't know there was youth wrestling. So that was my intro to kind of like the club scene, probably about 7th or 8th grade. And then the rest was history. I mean, my dad was my coach, but he would take me down 2-3 times a week down to Arturo's. We'd load up after practice, drive about 1 hour and 15 minutes and 1 hour and 30 minutes practice and come back. We had a couple other guys that would carpool with us from Calhoun, but I mean, in our area, I was the only person I ever saw outside of maybe like Jacob Harris was there every now and then. He would bounce in.
He would go down to Arturo's from Raw.
He would do it in. He practiced at Walker for a little bit. He would do like, kind of have like different locations at schools. And Walker, that's what Chris wrestled at. So he would do Sundays down there usually, and we would usually get a pretty good room for that. But outside of that, like, I don't really remember anybody else really doing it in our area. It just wasn't a thing. And, that was probably one thing that led to me wanting to do Grindhouse in Northwest Georgia, just to offer something for the kids. I always kind of wanted to do that. I didn't really know what capacity. I knew I wanted to coach after college, but, it worked out that way. And that's kind of how I started Grindhouse.
I remember, we hooked up with you like right as you were leaving Calhoun into the Dalton room. Mm-hmm. Like, we never actually went to the famous Calhoun room down there that you told me about. Like, it was like right after you got like there at the Dalton room.
Right.
And for some reason to this day, like, Hamilton, Billy and Bryson are best buddies, right? And, they do like everything together. We carpool all the time. And Hamilton, when he was doing like those summer, like, I think it was last summer, he would do like Tuesday, Thursdays, like at 10 in the morning. And like, he'd come by here and pick up Bryson, and he'd take him with him, and they'd like practice with Dalton down there. Mm-hmm. And I remember he came home one day and he says, Dad, he says, dude, I have like this fondness of this Dalton room. I can't explain it. He's like, it's like, that's home down there. He goes, I walk in, he's like, I spent so much time down there when I was little. And even yesterday, or was it yesterday, last week, whenever we did record the podcast with Luke Carpenter, right? Mm-hmm. I was talking to him and I told that story. I tagged you in it, I think this morning or yesterday, about Ollie when he first started freestyle, like leg lacing him from one end to the other of that Dalton room. And he talks about that sometimes. And dude, what's cool about it is, like, in our area, you were talking about, like, at your time, there was really nothing really here, right? Right. Now, like Sutherland's running Boyd, like, he's got a bunch of kids, right? Now the new Kane Nation, East Hamilton club's popping up. Saudi's got 80 kids. It's a staple now, right? Like, yeah. And you're running it in 2 states now, which I think is impressive, right? Like, you're running it in 2 states, so you're covering a big area. And it's interesting because where you were saying you beat that kid and made the Team Georgia, now, like, at this point in time, you pretty much know who the top kids in our area is, right? Like it's going to be hard to find a kid that comes out of nowhere and just smashes somebody, right? Like that's not really a thing anymore. So like for you having that, not really having that pressure, right, coming up, I guess that's what I'm getting at now. If you're not really having that pressure coming up, do you feel like it never, like even when you got in high school, like did you feel pressure when competing, like I had to win? Did you feel that, or did it kind of not affect you because you never really had that growing up?
I mean, I was pretty. I mean, I still am. I do a better job at hiding it probably now, but I'm really competitive growing up.
Yeah.
So any pressure I put on myself, it was internal. Just because I wanted to win. I didn't like losing. I hated losing. So it was never really anything that I felt from dad or family or friends or anything, because most of my friends didn't know what I was doing half the time.
Right.
They just knew I wasn't doing whatever they were doing, because most of them were basketball or didn't do anything. So, I was always gone on the weekends. But I don't know. I don't really ever, any pressure I would have felt would have been on me, and that I put on myself. So I don't, even if I would have been wrestling at a little guy, I would have wanted to win, and thought I should win, and really wanted to dominate. That was always wanted to follow your opinion. And if I didn't, I felt like I lost. I would get upset if I didn't beat you that bad, or if you scored on me, I'd get upset. So I think that would have been the same regardless, probably. But I think it definitely maybe puts a little bit, depending on the kid, maybe he has a little bit more pressure on him because he's committed a lot to it. But I think guys that are about learning the sport, learning the skill, trying to become students, they realize they're never going to get to where that finish line. There's never a finish line. There's always something else, even coaching. So if you just kind of enjoy the process of it, I think you don't get too wrapped up in it. Even though everybody wants to win, you do it because you do it to win. I mean, especially at a really high level. But it's more about you're passionate about it. It's something that I could put myself into, and reap the benefits of it. Unlike like team sports, where team sports are awesome. I love all sports. I played all sports, but wrestling was the one where I was in control of everything. So I like that aspect of it. I didn't like, I could play a really good game at receiver or defensive back, but we could still lose by 20. So wrestling, it was all on me. I like, I didn't think of it like WWE or something, but I always kind of like that aspect of like, you're out there wrestling in front of everybody, and then, that's.
I kind of brought that up not long ago. That you've seen. I don't know if you've seen it. You probably did, where Carter Sirachi like called out AJ Ferrari.
Oh yeah.
Like, did you seen that? And as soon as that happened, I'm like, dude, that's good for the sport of wrestling.
Yeah, that stuff's good.
Yeah, like I feel like one thing that people like even me, right? Like, I dabbled around and I wasn't great. Like I was a better football player or whatever. But when you like being through this now for what, 9 years or whatever it's been with Bryson, one thing that just parents in general don't understand is like they can watch practice and whatever, but they really don't get like how hard this is, right? Like this is the hardest thing in the world. And when they go to like a wrestling duel, like for instance, we were all at the like them ones at North Whitfield this past year, right? There's what, like 18 teams there, a bunch of parents and stuff. Most parents didn't pay attention to anything until their kid wrestled, whatever. So with the sport of wrestling, it's hard to get an emotional attachment to like a specific guy or or whatever. Like, so I think to get that casual viewer to maybe getting more involved in the sport of wrestling, you need more of that conflict. Otherwise, it's just two guys wrestling, right? So if they're like last night, I just seen this morning on Twitter that last night's Who's Number One was the most viewed Who's Number One in history. Why is that? Bo Bassett and Daniel Sapita. Nobody knew could he beat him twice. Like it built something there. And it's the same thing with you guys with like Baylor and McCallie, right? Like that's a big rivalry, so there's an emotional investment there. So like I agree with you on that with like being in front of fans and like, but for the fans' point of view, you kind of need like some kind of emotional investment. And Cleveland does that real well, right? Like they got community support and whatever, and it could be a JV match and there'd be 1,000 people there or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of thing needs to kind of build more.
Yeah, I think the more they build on that kind of stuff, it helps. Social media helps build that stuff with wrestling now, especially like a small market. Like we're kind of a niche market. Everybody kind of knows everybody. So, but social media is really like Flow when it came around in 07. I graduated college in 05. So I missed all that. But now just like all the online resources, being able to connect kids, that's probably why it was the biggest who's number one, because you got all these kids on social media and they're following it and they're, love heroes and, want to try to mimic them. And so I think the more storylines they can create like that are awesome for, big regional events, national events. I know Southeast Wrestle has really done a good job probably the last several years, just on being a good media source for our area. Because, Southeast doesn't really always get maybe a lot of national attention compared to your PAs or your Callies or Iowas or Oklahomas. But, having media sources to cover wrestling in the Southeast, I think that's really big too.
Well, I pulled this up the other maybe 2 weeks ago. I was looking and I was kind of in like a debate, and everybody, like all our followers, everybody always kind of bashes the South with wrestling, right? And I pulled it up. The 14U Georgia freestyle team placed 8th 2 years ago, right? In the freestyle national duels. Mm-hmm. And then that same cadet team placed 8th as a bunch of first-year cadets. So and that's Georgia. And then you got like the year we were there 2 years ago, Florida, I think, placed 10th out of that. So you had Florida, Georgia, Tennessee was about 13th, right? So you're starting to see like kind of a shift, right? There's
even before that, I want to say I can't remember what year it was exactly, but it was when like Henson, Cole Hunt was on that team. It might have been 16-ish or something, but cadets or the 14U team won national duel. The Greco team did, and I think the freestyle was high up there. So, we've always had good wrestlers. I think just the depth of wrestling in the South, I'd say Florida is they probably produce more guys than most, but I'd say Georgia's caught up with that probably the last 10 years. And then Carolinas are coming along. They always have, Bama's coming along with all their club scene and stuff. So it's like, it's getting a lot better. Tennessee's kind of probably about like where they're probably a little bit better, but they're about where they were. I mean, when I was coming out, the Chattanooga area was crazy. It was good. I mean, Tennessee might have been they've probably been better than Georgia, maybe even.
Really? That's interesting.
With, you had like guys, Ward and Blackman were wrestling at Okie State, who they were the Penn State back then. So you had Keller, he was at Nebraska. He's 2-time All-American from Bradley. Jordan Lean was an NCAA champ from Baylor, Cornell. So you had a lot of guys out there competing. Marable at Missouri, several guys at UTC that were doing well. So, this whole area, you had the Keefs, All-American back then, Michael. So,
dude, their story is ridiculous, right? They didn't start wrestling until 9th grade.
Well, I think they were 8th grade, but yeah.
Well, maybe 8th or 9th, whatever.
They were in middle school when they started, but yeah, they're crazy. That just shows you what having a brother, how that's a fit. Yeah, having a twin, because you have a practice partner all the time.
I think it was it Hatcher? I think Hatcher said something like that to me, right? About like it's Brandon Bruner. Brandon Bruner said, have you ever noticed, and this is before I mentioned the Keeps, he said, have you ever noticed twins that were bad at wrestling? I said, we thought about it, and there's like the Bickerton twins up in Ohio that are killers right now. and we wrestled him like years ago at some new way tournament. Freaking killed him, man. And it's like
those guys right now, they're kind of
yeah. And we were talking about, he's like, well, you can't say, well, your arms are longer than mine, or you're the same. It's like, how can you not improve that way? Dude, I want to bring up, because it's really cool, the McCallie program. You're over the middle school. Dude, that program was kind of on a down for many years, right? Like, well, I think I read 94 before this past year was the last state championship. Is that right? 94?
Traditional. It was before the split.
94. So
it's the first time they've had it since it's been split. That was like right as the public-private split happened. And then since then they haven't won traditional since then. I think we won duels in 06 or something like that. Like it had been a while for duels, but
you're still talking years, 16 years, whatever.
Right.
This past season, they won both, right? Like they hit both. And, with Baylor, for people that see this, that don't understand the dynamic here, there's multiple private schools in the Chattanooga area. The two main schools are Baylor and McCallie, right? You do have Chattanooga Christian and like Boyd Buchanan.
I'd say Hamilton County is, it's just there's a lot of private schools in Hamilton County. It's nothing like where I grew up in Georgia. It was all public. You had some private that were in Atlanta, but outside of Darlington, there wasn't really much around where I grew up. But I always heard about Baylor McCallie rivalry from people I grew up with, but I didn't really get it. I'm saying I don't really understand that. But you'd see the names or the school names and hear about it. And then when I got to UTC, I went to school with some of the guys that were there and that heard about it. And then I actually coached at Baylor for 3 years right out of college. And I was
right. So I got to see sides of it.
Yeah, I got to experience it. The first couple of years, it's pretty cool. The duel, like we both had pretty competitive teams with each other back then. But I want to say we won it every time, because this year, when we beat them this past year, they hadn't won since before I was at Baylor. McCallie hadn't beat them in a duel. It had been long, but just seeing, I remember one year at Baylor in like maybe 08. I mean, they had to shut down. They had to quit letting people come in that gym. It was so crowded. So I'd never seen a high school duel like this. It was really cool. I mean, very rarely a college duel around these parts. So yeah, it's a cool dynamic to be a part of. I told Jake and those guys, I don't know about any of the old timers, but we won state when I was over there, and we've won it now. So I don't know if there's any coaches that have won state at both schools wrestling wise.
I said whenever you got that job, and I'm entitled to my opinion, whoever don't like it, I said they're going to turn that around really fast. I said it's about to get turned around really fast. And they're like, well, their program, talking about the middle. I was talking to some middle school coaches. I was like, dude, you don't understand, man. I said that thing's going to get turned around quick. And I've always kept up with you, right? That first year you placed like third as a team in that little middle school division with the kids that were there.
Right. With the middle school. Yeah.
And then you had some kids come in, and that middle school team you had till Christmas was absolute killers, right? And then they moved up to the high school, and you took the rest of that team and won the league, right? Like later that year. And I remember you text me. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning or something. You're like, got him. And I was like, my dog, because so really quick, like it shows how coaching and that works on any sport, any level, like shows how quick things can turn around. You can even look at Hamilton down at Dalton. They were in a cesspool, and he took them to like 5th in the state, right? Yep. Like coaching makes a big difference. And I was telling people, I was like, dude, wait, McCallie's going to turn it around. Then all of a sudden, you're running these practices. These middle school kids are coming up. You're starting to get kids to come in. Then you win state. Like it's been a great couple of years for that McCallie program.
It has. It took when I moved in, the first year I was here was 1920. So it was the COVID year. And we had
2020.
1920. So we finished the state tournament, and then like the next month is when everybody went home. So the first 2 years were probably pretty tough. Not because we didn't have good wrestlers. It was just I felt like we were kind of stuck. It was unfortunate because Whitworth and Emery and Jack and Plagle and that whole senior group, like we had a good senior group, but they kind of got cheated in 2020, 21. Even though we got to wrestle state here in Chattanooga, we didn't get to compete as much. So then the next year it hurt. We didn't have the growth that we wanted. And then luckily everybody kind of got on the same page, and, administration and the coaching staff and just the club started. We were able to do more because then you could practice more, obviously. And we were able to get some kids in that we were after, and it all worked out. I think we were a couple years ahead of last year of where we thought we would have been, but I think that speaks to some of the kids we were able to get in and were able to mature. We had 4 8th graders in the high school lineup.
Yeah.
So, like with the middle school, we lost those guys, and we were still able to find a way to beat Cleveland in league last year. So that was really big for our the program, especially in the middle school. So high school, we just the guys that we've got in there, they do everything. I mean, we've got the first year I was there or here, we had maybe 20 guys at the end of the season. This past year, we're up, at least in the high school room. Middle school, we keep around 40, and then high school right now, last year we had like 50 kids in the room. So, that says a lot to just the whole staff. That kids want to be a part of the program, even though some of them might not ever get the chance to start. At least varsity lineup, it makes that's one thing that's tough about wrestling. But I think that says volumes about our program. Just you got kids that are wanting to do it, that maybe new to it. They don't know as much, but they think it's fun. And the kids we got in, they're doing a great job. We're still trying to get the right kids in. It's hard. I would say one of the biggest challenges, which now the wrestling program, it helps that we're having some success, but being all boys sometimes is a little bit of a red flag to an adolescent boy.
Yeah.
And I totally get that aspect of it, but as a parent now, and even having friends over here when I was growing up in college and kind of messing with them about it being all boys, it's really, when you come take a look at it from a parent and a school and a work perspective, I think people are really surprised when they come over and see how much, I don't know about freedom, but just,
it's a very calm environment.
It is, and it eliminates the one distraction, the main distraction of all adolescent boys. So, and with social media and the way these kids are connected outside of school, it's like they still have pretty regular social lives. But during the school day, during the work day, they're not distracted. And I think and they don't care. I mean, most of the guys, when they get here, who do you hang out with anyway when you're an adolescent boy? You hang out with your boys. So it's not like you're missing out on anything by any means. And I think once people come here and they see it, they're like, oh, this is great. There's a lot of free time, freedom that they get with it just being boys here, where, we don't have to supervise them in some situations that you would in others. So they get a little bit more responsibilities placed on them if they can handle it. And most of them do a really good job with it. So it's, I love it. Like I couldn't imagine going back actually and teaching at a co-ed school now. It's just from a work standpoint, classroom, training. It's just a lot of fun. Like I really enjoyed it. It reminds me a lot of like when I was coaching at Reinhardt, coaching college a little bit, kind of reminds me of that. So.
And it's funny you brought up Reinhardt. Bedard's one of the greatest dudes. I've kind of gotten to know him.
I owe a lot to Jeff Bedard. He took a chance on me several years ago coming in and starting that program with him in 16. And I was there till I came up here. And really, me and my wife started having children, and I needed to get closer to home. I was traveling a lot. So it took up a lot of time. So I was fortunate that this job opened up when it did, and had an opening to come up here with one of my college teammates, Jake Yost, and some other fellow UTC and college wrestlers. I don't think people realize how many people we have on staff here that are just teachers, faculty that, totally about the sport and the school and nothing about themselves. But I mean, we have 7 guys on staff this past year, and not all of them do it year round. They don't do club stuff, but I want to say like 6 of them are Division I wrestlers. David Levitt's probably one of the best technicians in the Southeast. He wrestled at Boise, he was state champ here at McCallie, and he just coaches here. I mean, not too many people know about him, but when they come in here, all the boys know him because he runs through the room still. And then, you got Connell, who's around, and Herring last year. I mean, he used to be the head coach at Citadel. You got West Virginia, Slough, just a bevy of coaches that love to put in a lot of time with these boys. So, our staff here is pretty awesome,
I was thinking about it the other day. I was talking to Knox, right? He's starting over there now, I guess. I thought it was next year, but Richie, yeah. And we've known Axel forever, and Knox started coming back around maybe 2 years ago, I guess, something like that. And Shane, their dad's a great dude. Like, I love those guys; they're good people. And I was like, man, you start next year, right? This is the other day. He said, no, I'm there now. I was like, well, how's it going? He's like, man, it's cool. I was like, are you doing okay with school and keeping up and everything? He said, man, it's a lot. And he said, but I'm doing it,
It is. Typically, if they can, I mean, I remember being in college my first year or two and, having struggling a little bit with school, just readjusting to the college rigor. And the one guys that never had a problem and were always just like, this isn't anything different than I've been doing, is all my buddies that went to McCallie at UTC. They just never seem to be, because they've seen it already. So if one thing, we don't have like a college prep course, but they're prepping you for the next level of life, whatever that may be. And that's something that's really cool. You don't really hear a lot, or I didn't hear a lot when I was growing up. They want you to fail. They want you to get in situations where you're in a tough environment. You're with a lot of alphas. You're with guys that win. And it might not just be wrestling. It might be anything, like playing an instrument or, whatever. But the expectations are high. We got kids that are kids, but one thing here, I think all the kids have some kind of expectation, which is really cool.
I think, and being held to that standard. We talked about this in another podcast with a kid, and he was talking about how, like, when he decides to go off to college, how far away would he go, things like that. And I brought up the fact, like, in that environment, like, you're used to your parents making sure your meals are ready, or what we're doing, all those types of things, and your laundry's done and whatever. And it's kind of the same thing on an academic level, right? Like, I kind of seen it. I think, Bryson spent a day over there, and I was over there for a day, maybe a couple of years ago, and everything's really structured a lot more than in a public school. Like, it just is, right? It's way more structured. You do this, you do this, you do this. but at the same time, in the means of that structure, you kind of got freedom. So it's a really cool dynamic that kind of allows kids, like you said, to fail, make mistakes, make bad choices, make good choices. So I can see that being a great thing for, the future of your life.
Yeah.
Dude, I was going to ask you this before we wrap up. How'd camp go Saturday? I didn't get to go up there, but he was telling me he got to roll around with you a little bit.
Yeah, I thought it went well. More people are starting to. I mean, we've had a really good preseason, I think. I've been encouraged. You got Coach David now is helping out. Got a couple other guys helping out. Got Jackson Wells down in Dalton at the Rocky Face one. Hunter Nolan's been coming in a good bit, old Hunter. So, the help. We got a couple other guys that are helping out up here at McCallie. So that's been a huge blessing. I think it's been good too for the guys just to hear somebody else's voice besides mine all the time. And so I've enjoyed that aspect of it for sure. And, just getting to be around other people. And so I'm really looking forward to this year. I think the match day went great. Try to get them some mat time before Super 32 in a couple of weeks. I think we've got between the school and the club, 17 guys going. So between elementary and high school. So that's encouraging. It's the biggest group we've had in a while. We had two of those guys got third or maybe a third and a fourth in middle school last year. Got a couple guys place in middle school. So would love to see. We haven't had a high school placer in a little bit. So it'd be good to have somebody get up on the podium or win it in a couple weeks. But, it's a good measuring stick. Super 32 is pretty cool. We didn't have preseason. Well, we had NHSCA nationals when I was growing up.
Was that a preseason tournament back then? Did they have a preseason?
It was the preseason nationals back then. They didn't. It was just called NHSCA preseason nationals, and so we had that back in the day. But outside of that, it was we didn't really have anything until season started. So it's crazy how kids just trends and how kids change and recruiting changes. And, you could do really well at this tournament and
be set.
You would set you up, so it's cool to have those opportunities for these guys. And, I think most of the guys that are serious about it now, they're training 10, 11 months out of the year, taking time off in between or whenever they have competitions. And that doesn't mean you're going gung-ho, but, once you get to about high school, ninth grade, you're kind of figured out what you want to do. You don't see as many multiple sport guys, even though I don't, I like it when they play other sports. Not everybody's going to be a college wrestler. So, I get that aspect of it, but, we got a lot more guys competing now at our earlier times of the year, which is pretty cool.
And there's a lot of opportunities in the Southeast, right? Like within the past 3 months, there's been 4 or 5, either duels or tournaments that's been pretty good that you can get to within 100, 200 miles, radius. So there's a lot of good stuff going on, and that's cool. You got a big number going out there, man. Last year we were out there with you last year. You remember that? I remember the best thing about that whole, well, it wasn't good at all, but if you remember how that last match ended, we still talk about that. He Granby rolls. You remember that? Granby rolls. He's on his side. The ref's on the other side, and he starts counting back points. And you're losing your mind over it. Me and Villers are standing on the rail, and you're losing your mind. You're like, dude, and they gave that kid the back points, lost the match. And I remember the whole way home, he's like, dude, I got screwed. I'm like, man, it's over. Let it go. Let's go home. But when you put as much into that, especially at that tournament, right? And you work as hard as you do, and you can make the weight cut and all those things, and something kind of gets thrown in there that probably shouldn't have happened. It's hard to swallow in that moment, right? If it was at a high school door or something, you could live with it. But man,
it was one of those things that I remember, though. that's just part. I mean, that's like part of it. You know, that's bare minimal. I remember Terry used to always tell us that at Chattanooga. You know, it's like you signed up for this to make the weight, to do the training, to do all that. So, you know, it is that's bare minimal is making weight and doing all that stuff. You know, it just comes with the territory. That's why a lot of kids, you know, a lot of kids don't want to do it. You know, a lot of Bryson's friends don't want to do the extra. Like they want to be good, but they don't want to do everything that it takes to be great. So they're okay with being good with a sport like wrestling.
And you know, he tries to get some of those Ringo kids to go to different practices and stuff, and he pushes it and stuff. And I think last week he got 2 of them to go up to UTC for a night. And
that's the same thing anywhere, though. It's not just there. It's just a tough sport. You know, it's like you got to spend a lot of time doing it if you want to be really good at it. And if you don't love it, you can't make them love it. So, but it's the best sport in the world, though.
Oh, absolutely, dude. But it's hard. It's a grind, right? Like, especially when you know, I've said this, like people that grow up, all the people I've ever met that did this their whole life, yourself included, Josh, you know, Steve, everybody I've ever met, they all have this underlying quality about them that I think you can only get by doing that for as long as you did, right? Like where you were telling me you were on a 5-year diet at UPC. Like, dude, that is, I wouldn't do that. There ain't no way I'd do that. Yeah. So you're like, it takes a special person that has a lot of great qualities, and you build a lot of great qualities doing this sport.
It's one of those, people suffer different ways, you know, got different trials and tribulations, and wrestling is definitely grouped into that for sure. It's more self done to yourself, but it's definitely, it's not as much fun, you know, while you're doing it, but it definitely pays off in the long run. That's after my years at UTC, I'd have people that are, man, it was after that Terry episode came out on Flow and people realized who he was, because not too many people outside of wrestling world didn't really know, even in the wrestling world. But they're like, oh, is it really cool to say you wrestle with brands? And I'm like, well, it wasn't at the time, but now it is. You know, it's cool having a relationship, and just the relationships you meet with wrestling. You know, it's such a small world. It's cool having access to a lot of those guys.
Quantal talks about that all the time too, about brands. And
oh yeah, he got the rough year. He got the like coming in and cleaning house type year. He had the first year of it, and then he was done. He backed off a little bit after that first year, but the first year was crazy.
Like he told me that. He said, man, he'd just come in. He said, be on weight in the morning. He'd just walk out and stuff like that. He'd tell me, he'd be like, you need to be on weight tomorrow.
We wouldn't wrestle for a week, and he would, you know, be on weight tomorrow when you come in. And that was the thing with him. You never knew. He would give you a schedule, so you knew you were going to practice, but you didn't know to what extent. Like at the end of the workout today, we would find out what we were doing either later tonight or tomorrow. So you didn't really know until the end of that workout what you were doing next. So you really couldn't, you know, all year you couldn't really make plans at all, because it was all day, every day. So
that's wild, man.
I mean, summertime we would get a little bit of time off, but you know, luckily I had a job where they would let me miss when I needed to, and he would call me in the midday and say, hey, we got to work out in an hour. Or, you know, I remember here at Jacob telling me, he'd call him at 11 o'clock at night, be like, hey, I need you here at 6, or just, you know, things like that, where it isn't normal to normal people. And a lot of people think it was crazy, but you kind of have to do that stuff to give yourself an edge. At a small school like that, when you're competing against blue chips from Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Penn State, Iowa, you got to do something a little bit different to make yourself feel like you're tough. So, or you can,
and you even told me stories about him dropping y'all off up in Flintstone and running back, and like
you do that on road trips on the way back in the snow, like put us out of the van, say, I'll see y'all, you know, 4 miles down the road. It just depended on like his mood that day.
all those experiences, and led to, like, you have this group of people, and even now with him coaching out of Iowa, there's people graduating and going on and taking college jobs or high school jobs or whatever. Like, the Brands brothers have left like such an amazing legacy on the sport of wrestling. Like, and it's it's kind of unmatched, because even like in our area alone, there's a couple, 4 or 5 guys, right, that were a part of that. And dude, like, and you see that, like, it kind of, I guess what I'm trying to say here is, like, what they've kind of passed on to like your generation of guys, and like the ones coming behind you, they're going to keep spreading that around. So like the Brands brothers like influence is going to be continuing forever. Like, and it's crazy awesome stories, and I'd love to talk about. We got to do this again at some point, and only talk about Perry Brands stories about coach at UTC, because I think that would be hilarious.
That'd probably be, you get me and Quantel both on.
Yeah, I'll get him, and y'all can just kind of chat, and we'll do that, because he's been mentioning to me he wanted to hop on anyway. And by the way, if you're wondering who Quantal is, he is the guy that created the Bmoney Beastin universe that is behind me as we speak.
And he invented and he created all my Grindhouse logos.
Yeah, he does. He's done so many schools and teams. Langford at the Langford Studio on Instagram. Matt, dude, I love you, bro. I love chatting it up with you. McCallie's in for another good season. GrindhouseWrestling.com, located Chattanooga, Northwest Georgia. Dude, thanks for hanging out with me, telling me some stories, man.
Sounds good. Appreciate you having me.